Good morning. This is Lanny Stern from Sotheby's International Realty. I'm here with Ari Ditkofsky from Dominion Lending. We're here because right now there is quite a bit of some stirring happening in the market, and the phones are blowing up. Everybody keeps calling and asking, wanting to know what's going on with interest rates. What do I do with my house right now? Do I buy? Do I sell? How am I managing it? It's definitely a unique and interesting time. We're just here trying to provide value. I've worked with Ari now for, I couldn't tell you how many trades. The two of us, I think, not only have a great rapport together, but I will go to him for all of the incredible attention to detail that he has, and has a wonderful way, I think, of sort of viewing what's happening in the marketplace and catering to individual clients' needs. And so with that being said, Ari, what is happening with the market? Let's talk about why it's happening and what is happening.
Well, it's a big question because a lot is happening. Just today in the United States, the head of the central bank, Jerome Powell, just announced the largest rate hike in, I think, the last 30 years of 75 basis points, which to people viewing this, when we talk basis points, a lot of people don't really understand, but the moral of the story is that rates are on the rise. And so that's definitely been no secret. People are hearing about it endlessly in the news, and it comes back to the question of how does this affect me? How does this affect my mortgage? And what strategy, should I deploy moving forward, whether I'm purchasing or whether I'm in an existing mortgage? So for one, I think it's important for us to kind of take a step back and talk about what's causing this stir. Why are interest rates rising? Why are people hearing about real estate prices falling? And I think we should talk about it on a little bit of a macro scale first, and then we'll bring it back to kind of the micro level, which is our territory of Ontario and Toronto. And
our local market.
Exactly. And so what's making interest rates rise? Well, the one word that everybody is hearing every single day is
debt.
And inflation.
Inflation.
Yeah. And so what's causing inflation? What is inflation? In simplest form, inflation is the reduction in your purchasing power. It is the reduction in the value of your money. And usually people associate that with the rising cost of things, of course. That's the other thing, right? But what causes inflation to happen? Well, inflation can be caused by by a variety of things, all of which are happening simultaneously right now to all of us, which is we just came out of a pandemic when governments felt the need to step in and do anything they could to keep people afloat when they were unable to work. They have to support their families, they have their debts to pay, they have their mortgage, they want to keep a roof above their head. And so what do you do when you can't work? So the governments flooded their economies with helicopter money, with free money, in every way possible. The printing machine was on. They were also creating access to easy credit, meaning they were reducing their lending rates, making it that much easier for people to get loans. Now, that doesn't just pertain to the real estate market. That also extends to all forms of credit market. People are borrowing against for their business loans. People are taking out a home equity line of credit. It's not just mortgages. People are spending more on their credit cards. And so you're seeing a lot of debt when people have access to getting it. And so that, in combination with a lot of cash that's been pumped into the system, you have everybody who's spending. And when people are spending a lot, there's increased demand. Well, the law of pricing is usually called the law of supply and demand. As much as people can pay, you can charge as much as people can pay. And if you have people competing for these products, for these goods and for these assets, well, that's going to put pressure and make the asset rise because supply can't meet demand, okay? Couple that with the fact that this new psychological shift has occurred where people have decided that they don't want to go back to work. So what is one of the things that employers need to do when they have a lot of demand and they need to get people back to work to try and meet that demand? They have to increase their wages to try and attract people back to work. Well, the law of business is that if people are increasing their expenses in a business, they're going to download these increased costs into the price of their goods, which means that the general consumer at the end user, is going to be the one paying for that. So yeah, they're paying more, but they're going to make their prices that much more expensive, right?
So we're experiencing inflation right now.
Yes.
The government has basically set a bar expectation at 2%, and this year we've seen 3x that number so far in the marketplace. That has really just resulted in them trying to now counter that from having first sort of swung the pendulum a little bit too far one direction, which was incentivizing people borrowing and trying to increase the debt. Now they're trying to swing it back the other direction, if I'm understanding the things you're saying here.
Well,
correctly.
one of the things that they're trying to do to correct inflation is, yes, the central bankers have now acknowledged pretty much that they've gotten it wrong, because in the onset of all of this, when they had decreased interest rates and assets were climbing and people were all buying and times seemed good, when any suggestion of inflation came up, it was universally met by central bankers with a universal answer of, it's only transitory, it will be mild. Transitory meaning that it's only temporary, it will come and it will go. And so they're now acknowledging that they've got that wrong. Now, one of the other variables that people should consider is wages have nothing to do with the low interest rates, right? People not wanting to go back to work is a direct cause of wages increasing, and all of a sudden people downloading that more into the cost of their goods. Additionally, you're seeing the cost of oil rise, okay? Well, things are transported all over the globe, so everybody's costs are going up for transport goods. And also, you're seeing you're having a war that's being fought. And there's several wars being fought, but there's one that's most notable in Ukraine, and
Right.
and it's affecting oil supply and sanctions with other countries around the world. And you're still having lockdowns in other parts of the world like China, where again you're having supply shortages. So shortages, again, less product, more demand, things are going up. But let's bring it back to real estate. The central bankers are now trying to correct that course because the housing market got incredibly hot. We've seen it rise 25 or 30%, in a single year.
Exceptionally.
And
Yeah.
so they need to do something because they want people to be able to buy houses, and they're worried about, a hard landing in the event that we do enter a recession. And so when you have the central bankers now wanting to backpedal, what they're doing is they're trying to increase interest rates to slow these down. And it has worked. So when people are saying what's happening in the real estate market, you've seen pretty rapid increases in rates, and what that does is that reduces the amount of people who can qualify for larger loans, and also it means that it kind of puts pressure on people who may have been over levered, and now it may force them to be more of a seller. So
Right, so it's in twofold right now, basically hurting the demand for buyers because
Right.
their affordability is coming down. On the other side, it's also forcing, perhaps not quite yet, but it is going in that direction that we will maybe see more sellers feeling as though now is the right time to do so that they can free up some of that equity, so that they're not feeling as though they're priced out of the market with things changing as well.
correct, and unfortunately in these situations, if there is a recession upon us, and if rates do continue to rise, and they're just kind of run away until they get a grasp on this inflation situation, what that usually does is it forces people who couldn't afford it, who are over levered, to become sellers. You see a lot more inventory hit the market, and then you do see actually an increase in renters. Those people who take that equity, whatever they have that's positive, they get out and they move over. But let's talk a little bit more granular about people who are in their mortgages and things like what they could do, or if you're looking to buy. I mean, whichever one you think we should talk about first. What do you think is more relevant?
Yeah, no, listen, it's a great segue. I would say, listen, people right now, I think, are wondering, is it the right time to maybe lock in on a mortgage, or to decide if it's time to move out? So let's address both of them.
Sure. So for people, if they're purchasing, why don't we start with the basic, if they're even looking,
Sure.
right? But
Yeah.
okay, so if you're out there and you're considering buying real estate, one of the best pieces of advice I give to clients and to anybody is the same thing your parents would say. Just don't be irresponsible. Don't spend beyond your means. Everybody wants to keep up and you want to live a certain lifestyle, and there's There's nothing wrong with that. Nobody can fault you for that. But when it comes to debt and your ability to service it, this is X's and O's. This is basic math. And you should always put yourself in the most comfortable, realistic position you can be in that doesn't affect your lifestyle and perfectly plays into your cash flow. So when I work with clients, sometimes a client who doesn't understand a mortgage comes and their first question is what can I afford? What can I do? And I try to bring that back to understand more about their income, more about their finances, more about their debts. What type of property do they visualize that they really would like? What's the goal? Then let's work that back. What are the costs you're going to have associated with purchasing this property? Compare that with your income, and do you feel comfortable with this monthly debt? There's other debts that are there. You have your potential condo fees, or if it's not a condo fee, you have your property taxes if you own a house. You have your insurance. You have your utilities and maintenance. There's costs of owning a home, and it's important that people don't just visualize down payment of what I'm borrowing, that you truly identify all the costs that are going to be in there, and then you can comfortably move ahead with your purchase, knowing everything that's going to work out for you.
Yeah, I mean, listen, our clientele are obviously, quite sophisticated.
Yes.
We're dealing with people that are, affluent from years of, educating themselves and getting ahead. And so the things you're speaking to, I think, are perfect because it's a very conservative mindset to understand how to best protect yourself in a time when other people might be facing, difficult times ahead. I think it's about protecting yourself for those downside risks and understanding how to sort of navigate the situation at hand.
Right. But as it pertains today, if I'm giving advice to buyers out there,
Yep.
I say you need to be overeducated on your mortgage capabilities. You need to truly understand how that works within your finances. And if you know that you're actively going to be looking, then you should be getting pre-approved immediately today. Because in a rising rate environment, if you do what's called a rate hold, so when I work with clients and a client knocks on my door or they get a call or they're referred by a professional and I speak with them, the first thing I'm doing is I'm getting all the necessary information I need and I'm doing what's called a rate hold for them. There's no cost to a rate hold, there's no risk to a rate hold, but what I'm doing is if rates are going to go up and I can put a rate on hold for this client for 120 days, 4 months, usually most people, for the most part, they purchase a piece of real estate once they start looking within that time frame, so it's very reasonable. So why wouldn't I put a rate on hold for them so that they could benefit from that? I have clients right now who are closing today. A fixed rate is now trending around 5%. If you're talking about a 30-year amortized mortgage in Canada, you're looking at roughly around 5%. Yet I have clients that are closing in the coming month that are getting in at low 3%. That's how quickly rates have risen since they bought. And because we did a rate hold for them, and believe me, they're happy that we did.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
I mean, right now it's a strategy that we're really employing with all active buyers because it's definitely an opportunity, I think, to get ahead of what we anticipate being where the eventual landing spot would be.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're right. I mean, if we're looking out to what's happening in 120 days from now, 4 months is a very long time. 4 months ago, we were seeing a very, very different story. February, we were up, roughly 30%. I think it was 28.5% from where it was the year earlier. And so today, I mean, if things are starting to sort of taper off some, that is a tremendous advantage and certainly something that we're employing with everyone right now.
Absolutely. Like, you cannot discount that. That's if your people always are looking, a lot of times people are not educated about mortgages. They just keep talking about rate. What's the rate? What's the rate? And what they don't understand is that there's a ton of mechanics involved in a mortgage. Your amortization is drastically going to affect your payment. Whether you're doing a fixed or a variable, whether you're doing, a 1, 2, 3, or 5 year, whether you're going closed or open. What are the bank's penalties that you're looking at? Sometimes people just think all the banks are the same, that the penalties are the same, that the privileges are the same, and they're not. And depending on each person's individual situation, their finances, their goals, their time horizon, what are they going to use this property for? Is it an investment? Is it a short-term solution? They need a specific product, yet the industry, and I say the banking industry, is not there to do anybody favors. I always say it's like the casino industry, the way they always say the house always wins, where there's not one house that owns all the casinos, but they all benefit from the same rules. This is the banking industry. They all benefit from the same consumer psychology, which is what's my rate? And that's all they want you to do is compare a number. But I would say 98% of the time when I discuss mortgage with a client and I say, here's a rate at 5% at a 25-year amortization, and here's a rate at 5.1%. And they say, well, I only want the 5%, not the 5.1, because the 5 is much better. And then I say, yes, but this is a 30-year am, and I tell them that this is actually going to be $600 cheaper a month, even though it appears to be a higher rate. And they didn't understand that an amortization could be stretched out further, which is better for their cash flow. Now, these are things where once we get to talking, I understand their finances and so on. But when they even spoke to their own bank, they're saying, oh, they gave me a rate. Well, that's because they're just trying to get you to sign on the line. They're not trying to educate you.
For sure.
So this is why I think it's essential. Talk to a professional. If your realtor is good at what they do, they have a slew of resources available to you. Obviously we work with clients all the time.
Oh yeah.
And the first step, I mean, sometimes you're in the car with them, it's that quick when they've already done it and you're calling, right? So it's important that clients have good resources around them, and make sure that you go in with the attitude that you're not trying to overextend yourself. You can always get more later, but you don't want to be backpedaling.
So I mean, obviously this is great information, but obviously not everybody is actively in pursuit of their next property. So people that are currently in something right now, I think it's a bit of a different situation trying to navigate that. So what is it that you would tell someone who's happy in their property but understands that yes, they've got payments right now, maybe they're currently on a variable, because there were lots of benefits to that, and I think there still certainly are.
Yeah.
And so what is it that you're going to tell that person right now?
So again, each conversation is unique to each individual, because what makes us tick and what makes us each sleep at night is completely different from person to person. But that being said, people who are in variable rate mortgages should be checking in with their bank. If you're certain banks, when you have a variable, see, what people don't know is when they hear variable, they think that every variable is going to change as soon as the banks raise. Some banks have what's called a fixed payment, so their variable means that the payment won't change. But when you make your payment and the central bank does raise their rate, more of that fixed payment is just going towards interest. But it's still comforting to some people to know that at least from a cash flow perspective, I can still afford it because my payment's not going to change.
Absolutely.
But their amortization will stretch out. So now they'll have to pay it over a longer period of time. But a lot of people, again, when we have that conversation, we figure out what makes the most sense for them. If that is something that's bothering them, then I advise people who are in variable rate mortgages to speak to their bank, and you can convert your variable rate mortgage to a fixed rate at any time without penalty. But what you need to do is you need to reach out to your bank and you need to say, what is the best fixed rate you're going to give me to convert? Okay, and then the bank is going to let you know, well, here's the best deal we can give you on a fixed. And at that point, I usually tell clients, tell me what that rate is, let's see what the rest of the market can offer you, and let's see if it makes sense for you to switch. And and what you have to be okay with is that the fixed is higher than the variable today. So what you'd be doing is you're saying, listen, I am okay jumping up, I'd rather go fixed, because if the bank is going to continue raising,
right,
and nobody knows when they stop, right? The same way we thought the pandemic can go on forever because they were so disorganized, and hard stop, regardless of what the consequences are, we're opening up, right? So we can't predict these things, and this is why you need to do what's best for you to sleep at night.
And there is a threshold with most mortgages, if I'm understanding correctly,
Yes.
where your variable rate might be automatically
Readjusted.
Readjusted.
So what that means is that banks have what's called a trigger rate. So if you're in a variable mortgage and you're not in if you're in a variable situation where your payment is fixed, what will happen is if it continues to go up and it reaches that trigger rate, which differs by bank, but if it hits that trigger rate, then the bank will get in touch with you to readjust, because they're going to have to adjust your payment anyhow to make sure that you're keeping a certain proportion of interest and principal.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting, very interesting. So wrapping things up some, what is it that you would tell somebody that's facing this situation, maybe uncertain with market factors and where it is that they sort of see themselves and how to address what's ahead? What would you leave these people with?
I would say that if you're in a mortgage, what's going to be inevitable is you may be coming up for a renewal. right? Or you may already be in a fixed mortgage where there could be a penalty if you were to break today. You want to speak to your bank and find out what is my penalty if I break today, and as well, you want to speak to someone like myself, or if you already have somebody, speak to your person, and you want to understand what are my options. Because let's say you're in a rate that's 2.7% or 2.8%, okay? And you're coming up for renewal in a year. Well, we've already seen how quickly these rates could rise.
For sure.
So you have to say to yourself, what's my penalty if I only have 1 year left? If I were to switch now and jump, because a year from now, our rate's going to be at 7%. If this is here to stay and this is going to continue. So what I like to do with clients is do a real deep dive and do an analysis to say, well, does it make sense given what the penalty is? Because the penalty could be small. The penalty could say, look, it's $1,000. Now, yes, we're giving up 1 year potentially of a low rate, but at what cost if we lock in today versus where the rate could be when you come up for renewal?
That's right.
Now, again, it's speculative, but exactly, we're anticipating, but and there could be speculation. But the point is, we're going to have a meeting of the minds, and we're going to put you in the best position possible to try and be comfortable moving forward. Because what you don't want to do is be losing sleep over how do you afford your home at night. And if we do enter a recession, and when you hear about stagflation or things like this, not just inflation but stagflation, that's not just about cost of goods rising. That's also about people's jobs and companies not doing well, and that means that people may be in jeopardy of losing income or seeing their income drop. Real estate sales may go down. There may be people who are doing real estate sales that have been doing well for several years may see a reduction in their income.
Sure.
Companies, as a result of inflation, people are going to want to be more defensive. They're going to want to spend less, meaning companies are going to be selling less, which means that as a means of trying to offset that, they may be unloading their own workforce. So we're kind of in a very uncertain period. Central banks are doing their part, and there have been, back to kind of interest rates, I just want to say, I had a very interesting discussion with somebody recently, and he had an interesting perspective. He said to me, I would prefer to go variable even if rates are going up. I said, well, okay, sure, that's not a problem, but why do you feel that way personally? He said, because it's a big discount to where fixed is today. It's still much cheaper, okay? And I think that there's a lot of variables that could subside that could slow down inflation. They've rapidly increased rates, so that's one thing for housing.
They're trying to
and
tackle
credit,
the inflation right
but
now.
if Russia and Ukraine stop, if the war ends,
Sure.
right, that might change sanctions, that might change oil flow, that might change a lot of things that could become, give more stability to the world. And then, you may begin to see things change a little bit. So he said, plus central banks are going to have to figure out that if they continue to raise interest rates, there's only so much that can do before you put people out of business or get them to lose their house.
For sure.
Because if you have supply chain issues, interest rates are not going to change with their supply chain issues. If you have people who are working hard and better wages, are being paid more wages, that has nothing to do with interest rates.
Mm-hmm.
So his view is that central banks will eventually have to come to terms with just accepting a higher rate of inflation, but still try to bring it down as best they can. But they can't run on forever.
No,
right?
No, certainly not. And I also sort of just wanted to address, I think that, yeah, there's talks of, recession or potentially, stagflation. But at the same time, I haven't felt as though, the real estate market is just ultimately coming to a dead stop. I mean, you're in a nice home, typically central Toronto here. Your house is worth more than $1. It's worth more than $100,000. We're over the $500,000 threshold. I mean, if it's a house in Toronto, certainly we're talking 7 digits. And so I still look at things and understand that there's a level to these things, and unfortunately a lot of the headlines are addressing the market at large, which is very important to understand what's happening. But I also feel pretty confident in saying that if you're owning a property in central Toronto, I don't think I would just race to go sell anything just because right now, as a knee-jerk reaction. I'm really not trying to, motivate people to do that. That's not how I'm feeling about the market right now. That it's this mass exodus that's a requirement. So
well, look, people should never be looking at their house like it's a stock.
Agreed.
Ever. And sure, you could say it might be my greatest value. It might be my greatest asset. And for a long time, for the last over a decade, people have been looking at real estate like it's an infallible stock that only goes in one direction.
For sure.
And unfortunately, when that happens, it could lead to bad things, because when there's high demand for assets, typically, whether it's stocks and the stock market's going up or real estate's going up, that actually encourages a psychology of, I want to buy more, I got to get in, this is a good thing, I got to get more. And a lot of times, people are taking out mortgages to do this, they're taking on debt to do all these things. And it's great when it's going in that one direction for as long as it can. But when the music stops, if the music stops, then you feel pressure. So when it's your home and you live in it, you don't treat it like it's a stock. Sure, as long as you're happy with your lifestyle. Some people, to buy in beautiful neighborhoods, that it's their forever home, and maybe they reached up to get it. Well, our parents will all tell us they remember what happened in the 80s and interest rates went up. But guess what? Life goes on. You have to move forward. And if there's tough interest rates, it just may be a time where people need to tighten their belts. People who pay their mortgages, especially Canadians, have typically tended to be more responsible than our counterparts to the south and other countries around the world. And so this is going to be one of those defensive times where, you have to dig in your heels and be more frugal, right? Be more responsible with your other expenses to make sure that you don't feel pressure with your house.
For sure. Listen, I appreciate your time. Thank you for your insights and all the amazing things you've got to share with us. If anybody wants to speak with Ari, I will be putting his contact information below. He's also got a little blurb that I've added, to my newsletter each month at the bottom there as well. So, Ari,
thanks for having me, buddy.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my pleasure. Stay in touch.
Okay.
I really hope it recorded because it didn't make a sound to turn off.